Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing in Book 4 of The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. We are on Chapter 6, this entitled, They Ride from Veiled Turris, Redhead Tells of Agatha. On the morrow, when they arose, Ralph heard the sound of horses and the clashing of arms. He went to the window and looked out, and saw that the spears stood up thick together at the tower's foot, and knew that these were the men who were to be his fellows by the way. Their captain he saw, a big man, all armed in steel, but him seemed that he knew his face under his sallay, and presently saw that it was Redhead. He was glad thereof, and clad himself hastily, and went out a doors. And he went up to him and hailed him, and Redhead leapt off his horse, and cast his arms about Ralph, and made much of him. And he said, It is good for sore eyes to see thee, Lord, and I am glad at heart that all went well with thee that time. Although, forsooth, there was guile behind it. Yet whereas I wotted nothing thereof, which I will pray thee to believe, and whereas thou hast the gain of all, I deem thou mayest pardon me. Said Ralph, Thou hast what pardon of me thou needest, so be content. For the rest, little is need there to ask if thou thrivest, for I behold thee glad and well honored. As they spoke, came the Lord forth from the tower, and said, Come thou, Lord Ralph, and eat with us ere ye take us to the road. I mean with Otter and me. As for thee, Redhead, if aught of ill befalls this king's son under thy way leading, look to it that thou shalt lose my good word with Agatha, yea, or gain my naysay herein, whereby thou shalt miss both fee and fair dame. Redhead looked sheepishly on Ralph at that word, yet winked at him also, as if pleased to be jeered concerning his wooing, so that Ralph saw how in the land lay, and that the guileful handmaid was not ill content with that big man. So he smiled kindly on him, and nodded, and went back with Bull into the tower. There they sat down all to meat together, and when they were done with their victual, Bull spake, and said to Ralph, Fair king's son, is this then the last sight of thee? Wilt thou ever come to the mountains again? Said Ralph, Who knoweth? I am young yet, and have drunk of the water of the well. Bull grew somewhat pensive, and said, Yea, thou meanest that thou mayest come back and find me no longer here. Yet if thou findest but my grave mound, yet may happen thou shalt come on something said or sung of me, which shall please thee. For I will tell thee that thou hast changed my conditions, how I wot not. Thy word is good, said Ralph, yet I meant not that. Never should I come to Utterbol if I looked not to find thee living there. Bull smiled on him as though he loved him, and said, This is well spoken. I shall look to see thee before I die. Then said Ursula, Lord of Utterbol, this also thou mayest think on, that it is no further from Utterbol to Upmeads than from Upmeads to Utterbol. The Lord laughed and said, Sooth is that, and were but my bull here, as I behold you, I should be of mind to swear by him to come and see you at Upmeads ere 10 years have worn. Then she put forth her hand and said, Swear by this. So he took it and swore the oath. That the sage of Swevenham said, This oath thou shalt keep to the gain and not to the loss both of thee and of thy friends of Upmeads. Thus were they fain of each other, and Ralph saw how Bull's heart was grown big, and he rejoiced thereat. But anon he rose and said, Now, Lord, we ask leave to depart, for the way is long, and mayhappen my kindred now lacks a man helping. Then Bull stood up and called for his horse, and Otter also, and they all went forth and gat a horseback and rode away from Veiled Turris. And Redhead rode behind them humbly till it was noon, and they made stay for meat. Then after they had broken bread together and drunk a cup, Bull and Otter kissed the wayfarers and bade them farewell, and so rode back to Veiled Turris. And Ralph and Ursula and the sage tarried not, but rode on their ways. But anon Ralph called to Redhead, and bade him ride beside them, that they might talk together. And he came up with them, and Ursula greeted him kindly, and they were merry one with another. And Ralph said to Redhead, Friend captain, thou art exceeding in humility, not to ride with the Lord or Captain Otter, save for chance hap I see not that thou art worser than they. Redhead grinned and said, Well, as to Otter, that is all true, but as for Lord Bull, it is another matter. I wot not but his kindred may be as good or better than any in these parts. In any case, he hath his kin and long descent full often in his mouth, while I am but a gangrel body. Howbeit it is all one, whereas whatso he or Otter bid any man to do, he doeth it. But my bidding may be questioned at whiles. And look you, Lord, times are not ill, so wherefore should I risk a change of days? Sooth to say, both these great lords have done well by me. Ralph laughed. And better will they do, as thou deemest. Give thee Agatha to wit. Yea, fair sir, quoth Redhead. No great gift that seemeth to me for thy valiancy, said Ralph. She is guileful enough, and loose enough for a worse man than thee. Lord, said Redhead, even of her thou shalt say what pleaseth thee, but no other man shall say of her what pleaseth me not. For all that is come and gone, and she is true and valiant, and none may say that she is not fair and sweet enough for a better man than me, and my good great luck is that, as I hope, she looketh no further for a better. Ursula said, Is it so, perchance, that now she is free, and hath naught to fear, she hath no need for guile? Hail to thee for thy word, lady, quoth Redhead, and then he was silent, glooming somewhat on Ralph. But Ralph said, Nay, my friend, I meant no harm, but I was wondering what had befallen to bring you two so close together. It was fear and pain, and the helping of each other that wrought it, said Redhead. Said Ursula, Good captain, how was it that she escaped the uttermost of evil at the tyrant's hands? Since from all that I have heard, it must needs be that he laid blame on her, working for her mistress of my flight from Utterbol. Even so it was, lady, said Redhead, but as thou wottest belike, she had got it spread abroad that she was cunning and sorcery, and that her spell would not end with her life ended. Nay, that he too whom her ghost should bear ill will, and more especially such a one as might compass her death, should have but an ill time of it while he lived, which should not be long. This tale, which sooth to say I myself helped to spread, the Lord of Utterbol trowed in wholly, so cunningly was it told, so that, to make a long story short, he feared her, and feared her more dead than living, so that when he came home and found thee gone, lady, he did indeed deem that thy flight was of Agatha's contrivance, and this the more because his nephew, he whom thou didst beguile, I partly guess how, told him a made-up tale how all was gone by the spells of Agatha. For this youth was of all men, not even saving his uncle, most full of malice. And he hated Agatha, and would have had her suffer the uttermost of torments, and he to be standing by the while. Howbeit this malice overshot itself, since his tale made her even more of a witch than the Lord deemed before. Yea, said Ursula, and what hath befallen that evil young man, captain? Said Redhead, It is not known to many, lady, but 2 days before the slaying of his uncle, I met him in a wood a little way from Utterbol, and the mood being on me, I tied him neck and heels, and cast him with a stone round his neck into a deep woodland pool, hight the Ramsbane, which is in that same wood. Well, as to my tale of Agatha, when the Lord came home first, he sent for her, and his rage had so mastered his fear for a while, that his best word was scourge and rack and faggot. But she was outwardly so calm and cold, smiling on him balefully, that he presently came to himself. He found that fear was in his belly, and that he might not do what he would with her. Wherefore he looked to it that however she were used, which was ill enough, God wot, she should keep the soul in her body. And at last the fear so mounted into his head that he made peace with her, and even craved forgiveness of her and gave her gifts. She answered him sweetly, indeed, yet so as he and all others who were bystanding, of whom I was one, might well see that she deemed she owed him a day in harvest. As for me, he heeded me not, and I lay low all I might. And in anywise we wore the time till the great day of deliverance. Therewith dropped the talk about Agatha, when they had bidden him all luck in his life. Forsooth, they were fain of his words, and of his ways withal, for he was a valiant man, and brisk, and one who forgat no benefit. And he was trusty as steel, merry-hearted withal, and kind and ready of speech, despite his uplandish manners, which a life not a little rude hath thrust on him. Chapter 7. Of their riding the waste, and of a battle thereon. They slept in no house that night, nor for many nights after, for they were now fairly on the waste. They bore with them a light tent for Ursula's lodging benights, and the rest of them slept on the field as they might, or should they come to a thicket or shaw, they would lodge them there softly. Victual and drink failed them not, for they bore what they needed on sumpter horses, and shot some venison on the way withal. They saw but few folk, for the most part not save a fowler of the waste, or a peat cutter, who stood to look at the men-at-arms going by, and made obeisance to the token of Utterbol. But on a time, the 5th day of their journey, they saw in the morning spears, not a few, standing up against a thicket side in the offing. Redhead looked under the sharp of his hand, and laughed as though he were glad, and he said, I know not clearly what these may be, but it looketh like war. Now, knight, this best to do. Hold with thee 3 of our best men, so that ye may safeguard the lady, and I with the others will prick on and look into this. Nay, said Ralph, thou mayest be yet uppaid of man's aid, and if I were by strokes on sail in the cheaping stead yonder, I will deal along with thee. Leave thy 3 men with the lady, and let us on. We shall soon be back. Nay, once more, dear lord, quoth Ursula, I fear to be left alone of thee, and it is meet that thou free me from fear. I will ride with you, but 3 horse lengths behind, so as not to hinder you. I have been worse bestead than this shall be. It is good, quoth Redhead. Let her ride with us, for why should she suffer the pain of fear in the lonely waste? But let her do on a hauberk over her coats, and still coif over her head, for shaft and bolt will ofttimes go astray. Even so they did, and rode forward. And presently they saw the spearmen, that they were somewhat more than their company, and that they were well mounted on black horses, and clad in black armor. Then they drew rein for a while, and Redhead scanned them again, and said, Yea, these are the men of thy brother, of thy hot-wooer, Lady Ursula, whom I cooled in the ram's bane. He be a man well nigh as old as his uncle, though he hath not made men tremble so sore. Albeit he be far the better man, a good warrior, a wise leader, a reaver and lifter, well wrought at all points. Well, 'tis not unlike that we shall have to speak to his men again, either outgoing or homecoming, so we had best kill as many of these as we may now. Do on thy sally, my lord. And thou, Michael le Green, shake out the bull, and thou, our noise, blow a point of war, that they may be warned. God to aid, but they be ready and speedy. In sooth, even as the pennon of the bull ran down the wind, and the Utterbol horn was winded, the black men-at-arms came on at a trot. And presently, with great screeching yell, they cast their spears into the rest, and spurred on all they might, while a half-score of bowmen, who had come out of the thicket, bent their bows and fell a-shooting. But now the men of Utterbol spurred to meet the foe, and as Redhead cast his spear into the rest, he said to Ralph, Glad am I that thy lady is anear to see me, for now I worship her. Therewith the 2 bands met, and whereas on neither side was the armor very stout, some men of either band were hurt or slain at once with spear thrust, though, save for Ralph, they did not run straight on each other, but fenced and foined with their spears deftly enough. As for Ralph, he smote a tall man full on the breast, and pierced him through and through, and then pulled out the Upmead's blade, and smote on the right hand and the left, so that none came anigh willingly. Shortly to say it, in 5 minutes' time the black riders were fleeing all over the field with them of Utterbol at their heels, and the bowmen ran back again into the wood. But one of the foemen, as he fled, cast a javelin at a venture, and who should be before it save Ursula, so that she reeled in her saddle, and would have fallen down right, but for one of the Utterbol fellows who stayed her, and got her gently off her horse. This Ralph saw not, for he followed far in the chase, and was coming back somewhat slowly along with Redhead, who was hurt, but not sorely. So when he came up and saw Ursula sitting on the grass with 4 or 5 men about her, he sickened for fear. But she rose up and came slowly and pale-faced to meet him, and said, Fear not, beloved, for steel kept out steel. I have no scratch or point or edge in me. So therewith he kissed her and embraced her, and was glad. The Utterbol riders had slain 16 of their foemen, for they took none to mercy, and 4 of their band were slain outright, and 6 hurt, but not grievously. So they tarried a while on the field of deed to rest them, and tend their wounded men, and so rode on again heedfully. But Redhead spake, It is good to see thee tilting, king's son. I doubt me I shall ever learn thy downright thrust. Dost thou remember how sorry a job I made of it when we met in the lists at Vale Turris that other day? Yea, said Ralph, thou were best to let that flea stick on the wall, for today at least. I have seen thee play at sharps deftly enough. Quoth Redhead, Lord, it is not 5 minutes' scramble. That which trieth a man is to fight and overcome, and straight have fight with the fresh foeman, and yet again, till ye long for dark night to cover you, yea, or even death. Warrior-like and wisely thou speakest, said Ralph, and whoever thou servest thou shalt serve well. And now once more I would it were me. Redhead shook his head at that word, and said, I would it might be so, but it will not be so as now. Forth on they rode, and slept in a wood that night, keeping good watch, but saw no more of the black riders for that time. On a day thereafter, when it was nigh evening, Ralph looked about, and saw a certain wood on the edge of a plain. And he stayed Ursula, and said, Look round about, beloved, for this is the very field whereas I was betrayed into the hands of the men of Utterbol. She smiled on him, and said, Let me light down, then, that I may kiss the earth of that field, wert thou were not stayed over long, but even long enough that we might meet in the dark wood thereafter. Sweetling, said Ralph, this mayest thou do, and grieve no man, not even for a little. For lo you, the captain is staying the sumpter beasts, and it is his mind, belike, that we shall sleep in yonder wood tonight. Therewith he lighted down, and she in likewise. Then he took her by the hand, and led her on a few yards, and said, Lo, beloved, this quicken tree. Hereby it was that the tent was pitched wherein I lay the night when I was taken. She looked on him shyly, and said, Wilt thou not sleep here once more tonight? Yea, well, beloved, said he, I will bid them pitch the tent on the same place, that I may smell the wild time again, as I did that other while. So there on the field of his ancient grief they rested that night, in all love and content. Chapter 8. Of Goldburg again, and the Queen thereof. Next day they went forth through the country where through Morfinn had led Ralph into captivity, and Redhead rode warily, for there were many passes which looked doubtful. But whether the ill men feared to meddle with them, or however it were, none waylaid them, and they all came safely to the gate of Goldburg, the towers whereof were full of folk looking forth on them. So they displayed their pennon, and rode into the street where folk pressed about them in friendly wise, for the new lord of Utterbol had made firm and fast peace with Goldburg. So they rode to the hostel, and gat them victual, and rested in peace that night. But Ralph wondered whether the queen would send for him when she heard of his coming back again, and he hoped that she would let him be, for he was ashamed when he thought of her love for him, and how that he had clean forgotten her till he was close to Goldburg again. But when morning was come, Ralph spake to Redhead, and asked him how he should do to wage men for the homeward journey on thence. And Redhead said, I have already seen the clerk of the port, and he will be here in an hour with the license for thee to wage men to go with thee to Cheaping Knowe. As for me, I must needs go see the king, and give him a letter sealed by my lord's hand. And when I come back from him, I will go round to the alehouses, which be haunted of men-at-arms, to see after strong carles for thine avail. But to the king hast thou no need to go, save he send for thee, whereas thou art not come hither to chaffer, and needeth not men of war. Ralph stared at him, and said, The king, sayest thou? Is there no queen of Goldburg? Said Redhead, There is the king's wedded wife, but her they call not queen, but lady. But the queen that was, said Ralph, where is she then? Yea, truly, said Redhead, a queen sat alone as ruler here a while ago, but whether she died or what befell her I know nothing. I had little to do with Goldburg till our lord conquered Utterbol. Lo, here the host, he may tell thee the tale thereof. Therewith he departed and left Ralph with the host, whom Ralph questioned of the story, for his heart was wrung lest such a fair woman, and so friendly, should have come to harm. So the host sat down by Ralph and said, My master, this is a tale which is grievous to us, for though the saints forbid I should say a word against my lord, that is now, nor is there any need to, yet we deem us happy to be under so dear a lady, and so good and fair as she was. She is gone, so that we wot not whether she be living or dead. For so it is that in the early spring, somewhat more than a year ago that is, one morning when folk arose, the queen's place was empty. Riding and running there was about and about, but none of the more was she found. Forsooth, as time wore, tales were told of what wise she had left us, and why. But she was gone. Well, fair sir, many deemed that though her lineage was known by seeming, yet she was of the fairy, and needed neither steed nor chariot to go where she would. But her women, and those that knew her best, deemed that whatso she were, she had slain herself, as they thought, for some unhappiness of love. For indeed she had long gone about sad and distraught, though she never wept, nor would say one word of her sorrow, whatsoever it might be. But, fair sir, since thou art a stranger, and art presently departing from our city, I will tell thee a thing. To wit, 1 month ago, or so after she had vanished away, I held talk with a certain old fisherman of our water, and he told me that on the same night of her vanishing, as he stood on the waterside handing the hawser of his bark, and the sail was all ready to be sheeted home, there came along the shore a woman going very swiftly, who, glancing about her as if to see that there was none looking on or prying, came up to him, and prayed him in a sweet voice for instant passage down the water. Wrapped she was in dark cloak, and a cowl over her head, but as she put forth her hand to give him gold, he saw even by the light of his lantern that it was exceeding fair, and that great gems flashed from the finger rings, and that there was a great gold ring most precious on her arm. He yeasaid her, asking partly because of her gold, partly, as he told me, that he feared her, deeming her to be of the fairy. Then she stepped over his gangway of one board onto his boat, and as he held the lantern low down to light her, lest she should make a false step and fall into the water, he noted, quoth he, that a golden shoe all begemmed came out from under the gown hem, and that the said hem was broidered thickly with pearl and jewels. Small was his bark, and he alone with the woman, and there was a wind in the March night, and the stream is swift betwixt the quays of our city, so that by night and cloud they made much way down the water, and at sunrise were sailing through the great wood, which lieth hence 20 leagues seaward. So when the sun was risen, she stood up in the fore part of the boat, and bade him turn the bark toward the shore. But even as the bows ran upon the sand, she leapt out and let the thicket cover her, nor having any of Goldburg seen her since, or the queen. But for my part, I deem the woman to have been none other than the queen. Seest thou then, she is gone, but the King Reynald, her cousins, reign in her stead, a wise man and a mighty, and no tyrant or skinner of the people. Ralph heard and pondered, and was exceeding sorry. And more had he been, but for the joyousness which came of the water of the well. Howbeit he might not amend it, for even if he were to seek for the queen and find her, it might be well worse than letting it be. For he knew, when he thought of her, that she loved him, and how it would be if she might not outwear her love, or endure the days of Goldburg, and he far away. This he said to himself, which he might not have said to any other soul. Chapter 9. They come to Cheaping Knowe once more, of the king thereof. Toward evening came Redhead, and told Ralph how he hired him 12 men-at-arms to follow him well-weaponed to Cheaping Knowe. Withal he counselled him to take a good gift with him to that same town to buy the goodwill of the king there, who was a close-fist and a cruel lord. Afterwards they sat together in the court of that fair house before good wine, Ralph and Ursula and Redhead and the sage of Swevenham, and spake of many things and were merry and kind together. But on the morrow Redhead departed from Goldburg with his men, and he loath to depart, and they gave him farewell lovingly. Thereafter Ralph's new men came to him in the hostelry, and he feasted them, and did well to them, so that they praised him much. Then he gat him victuals and sumpter horses for the journey, and bought good store of bows and arrows withal. Furthermore he took heed to Redhead's word, and bought a goodly gift of silver vessel and fine cloth for the king of Cheaping Knowe. The day after, he and his company departed from Goldburg towards the mountains, which they passed unfought and unwaylaid, partly because they were a band of stout men, and partly because a little before there had been a great overthrow of the wild men of those mountains at the hands of the men of Goldburg and the chapmen, so that now the mountain men lay close, and troubled none that rode any force. On the way they failed not to pass by the place where they had erst found Bull Nosy slain. There they saw his howe heaped up exceeding high and covered in with earth, whereon the grass was now beginning to grow. And with a great standing stone on the top thereof, whereon was graven the image of a bull, with a sword thereunder, whereby the wayfarers wotted that this had been done in his memory, by his brother, the new lord of Utterbol. So they came down out of the mountains to Whiteness, where they had a good entertainment, but tarried not save for one night, riding their way betimes to Cheaping Knowe. And they came before the gate thereof safe and sound on the third day, and slept in the hostelry of the chapmen. On the morrow Ralph went up to the king's castle with but 3 men, unweaponed, and bearing the gift which he had got for the king. Albeit he sent not away his men-at-arms till he should know how the king was minded towards him. As he went, he saw in the streets sad tokens of the Lord's cruel justice, as handless men, fettered and dragging themselves about, and folk hung up before chapman's booth and whipping cheer, and the pillar and such like. But whereas he might not help, he would not heed, but came right to the castle gate, and entered easily when he told his errand, for gift-bearing men are not oftenest withstood. He was brought straightway into the great hall, where sat the king on his throne amidst the chiefs of the port, and his captains and sergeants. These were, so to say, his barons, though they were not barons of lineage, but masterful men who were wise to do his bidding. As he went up the hall, he saw a sort of poor caitiffs, women as well as men, led away from the high place in chains by bailiffs and tipstaves, and he doubted not that these were for torments or maiming and death, and thought it were well might he do them some good. Being come to the king, he made his obeisance to him, and craved his good will and leave to wage men-at-arms to bring him through the mountains. The king was a tall man, a proper man of war, long-legged, black-bearded, and fierce-eyed. Some word he had heard of Ralph's gift, therefore he was gracious to him. He spake and said, "Thou hast come across the mountains a long way, fair sir. Prithee, on what errand?" Answered Ralph, "For no errand, lord, save to fare home to mine own land." "And where is thine own land?" said the king, stretching out his legs and lying back in his chair. "Westaway, lord, many a mile," said Ralph. "Yea," quoth the king, "and how far didst thou go beyond the mountains? As far as Utterbol?" Said Ralph, "Yet further, but not to Utterbol." "Ha!" said the king, "who goeth beyond Utterbol must have a great errand. What was thine?" Ralph thought for a moment, and deemed it best to say as little as he might concerning Ursula, so he answered, and his voice grew loud and bold, "I was minded to drink a draught of the well at the world's end, and even so I did." As he spake, he drew himself up, and his brows were knit a little, but his eyes sparkled under them, and his cheeks were bright and rosy. He half drew the sword from the scabbard and sent it back rattling, so that the sound of it went about the hall. He upreared his head, and looked around him on this and that one of the warriors of the aliens, and he sniffed the air into his nostrils, as he stood alone amongst them. And he set his foot down hard on the floor of the king's hall, and his armor rattled upon him. But the king sat bolt upright in his chair, and stared at Ralph's face. And the warriors and lords and merchants fell back from Ralph, and stood in an ordered rank on either side of him, and bent their heads before him. None spoke till the king said in a hoarse voice, but lowly and wheedling, "Tell us, fair sir, what it is that we can do to pleasure thee." "King," said Ralph, I am not here to take gifts, but to give them rather. Yet since thou biddest me, I will crave somewhat of thee, that thou mayest be the more content. And moreover, the giving shall cost thee nothing. I crave of thee to give me life and limb, and freedom for the poor folk, who I saw led down the hall by the tipstaves even now. Give me that or nothing. The king scowled, but he spake, This is indeed a little gift of thee to take, yet to none else save thee had I given it. Therewith he spake to a man beside him and said, Go thou, set them free, and if any hurt has befallen them, thy life shall answer for it. Is it fair enough, sir, that we have thy good will? Ralph laughed for joy of his life and his might, and he answered, King, this is the token of my good will. Fear not of me. And he turned to his men and bade them bring forth the gift of Goldburg and open it before the king, and they did so. But when the king cast his eyes on the wares, his face was gladdened, for he was a greedy wolf, and whoso had been close to his mouth would have heard him mutter, so mighty, yet so wealthy. But he thanked Ralph aloud and in smooth words. And Ralph made obeisance to him again, and then turned and went his ways down the hall, and was glad at heart that he had become so mighty a man, for all fell back before him and looked on him with worship. Howbeit he had looked on the king closely and wisely, and deemed that he was both cruel and guileful, so that he rejoiced that he had spoken not of Ursula. And he was minded to keep her within gates all the while they abode at Cheaping Knowe. When he came to the hostel, he called his men-at-arms together, and asked them how far they would follow him. And with one voice they said all that they would go with him whereso he would, so that it were not beyond reason. So they arrayed them for departure on the morrow, and were to ride out of gates about mid-morning. So wore the day to evening. But ere the night was old, came a man asking for Ralph, as one who would have a special alms of him, a poor man by seeming and evilly clad. But when Ralph was alone with him, the poor man did him to wit that, for all his seeming wretchedness, he was but disguised, and was in sooth a man of worship, and one of the port. Quoth he, I am of the king's council, and I must needs tell thee a thing of the king, that though he was at first overawed and cowed by the majesty of thee, a friend of the well, he presently came to himself, which was but ill. So that what for greed, what for fear even, he is minded to send men to waylay thee, some 3 leagues from the town on your way to the mountains. But ye shall easily escape his gin now, if I have speech of thee. For ye may take a by-road, and fetch a compass of some 12 miles, and get aback of the waylayers. Yet if ye escape this first ambush, unless ye are timely in riding early tomorrow, it is not unlike that he shall send swift riders to catch up with you, ere ye come to the mountains. Now I am come to warn thee hereof, partly because I would not have so fair a life spilt, which should yet do so well for the sons of Adam, and partly also because I would have a reward of thee for my warning and my way-leading, for I shall show thee the way and the road. Said Ralph, Ask and fear not, for if I may trust thee, I already owe thee a reward. My name is Michael Adale, said the man, and from Swevenham I came hither, and fain would I go thither, and little hope have I thereof, save I go privily in some such band as thine, whereas the tyrant holdeth me on pain, as well as I know of an evil death. I grant thine asking, friend, said Ralph. And now thou wert best to go thine house and trust what stuff thou mayest have with thee, and come back hither in the grey of the morning. The man shook his head and said, Nay, here must I abide tonight long, and go out of gates amongst thy men-at-arms, and clad like one of them, with iron enough about me to hide the fashion of me. It were nowise safe for me to go back into the town, for this tyrant wages many a spy. Yea, forsooth, I fear me by certain tokens that it is not at all so certain that I have not been spied upon already, and that it is known that I have come to thee. And I will tell thee that by hook or by crook, the king already knoweth somewhat of thee, and of the woman who was in thy company. Ralph flushed red at that word, and felt his heart bound, but even therewith came into them the sage. And straightway Ralph took him apart, and told him on what errand the man was come, and asked him if he deemed him trusty. Then the sage went up to Michael and looked him hard in the face a while, and then said, Yea, honest he is, unless the kindred of Michael of the Hatch of Swevenham have turned thieves in the third generation. Yea, said Michael, and dost thou know the Hatch? As I know mine own fingers, said the sage, and even so I knew it years and years before thou wert born. Therewith he told the newcomer what he was, and the two men of Swevenham made joy of each other, and Ralph was fain of them, and went into the chamber wherein sat Ursula, and told her how all things were going, and she said that she would be naught but glad to leave that town, which seemed to her like Utterbol over again. Chapter 10. An Adventure on the Way to the Mountains. On the morrow Ralph got his men together betimes, and rode out a gates, and was little afraid that any should meddle with him within the town or anigh it, and even so it turned out. But Michael rode in the company new clad, and with his head and face all hidden, in a white sally. As for Ralph and Ursula, they were exceeding glad, and now that their heads were turned to the last great mountains, it seemed to them that they were verily going home, and they longed for the night, that they might be alone together and talk of all these matters in each other's arms. When they were out of gates, they rode 2 miles along the highway, heedlessly enough by seeming, and then as Michael bade, they turned suddenly into a deep and narrow lane, and forth on as it led betwixt hazelled banks and coppices of small wood, skirting the side of the hills, so that it was late in the afternoon before they came into the highway again, which was the only road leading into the passes of the mountains. Then said Michael that now by all likelihood they had beguiled the waylayers for that time, so that they went on merrily till half the night was worn, when they shifted for lodging in a little oak wood by the wayside. There they lay not long, but were afoot betimes in the morning, and rode swiftly daylong, and lay down at night on the wayside with the less dread, because they were come so far without hurt. But on the third day, somewhat after noon, when they were come up above the tilled upland, and the land was rough and the way steep, there lay before them a dark wood swallowing up the road. Thereabout Ralph deemed that he saw weapons glittering ahead, but was not sure, for as clear-sighted as he was. So he stayed his band, and had Ursula into the rearward, and bade all men look to their weapons. And then they went forward heedfully and in good order. And presently not only Ralph, but all of them could see men standing in the jaws of the pass, with the wood on either side of them. And though at first they doubted if these were aught but mere strong thieves, such as any wayfarers might come on, they had gone but a little further, when Michael knew of them for the riders of Cheaping Knowe. Yea, said the sage of Swevenham, it is clear how it has been. When they found that we came first not that morning, they had an inkling of what had befallen, and went forward toward the mountains, and not back to Cheaping Knowe. And thus outwent us while we were fetching that compass to give them the go-by. Wherefore I deemed that some great man is with them, else they had gone back to the town for new orders. Well, said Ralph, then will they be too many for us, so now I will ride ahead, and see if we may have peace. Said the sage, Yea, but be wary, for thou hast to do with the guileful. Then Ralph rode on till he was come within half of those waylayers. Then he thrust his sword into the sheath and cried out, Will any of the warriors in the wood speak with me? For I am the captain of the wayfarers. Then rode out from those men a very tall man, and 2 with him on either side. And he threw back the sally from his face and said, Wayfarer, all we have weapons in our hands, and we so many that thou and thine will be in regard of us as the pips to the apple. Wherefore yield ye? Quoth Ralph, Unto whom then shall I yield me? Said the other, To the men of the King of Cheaping Knowe. Then spake Ralph, What will ye do with us when ye are yolden? Shall we not pay ransom and go our ways? Yea, said the tall man, and this is the ransom, that ye give up into my hands my dastard who hath betrayed me, and the woman who wendeth in your company. Ralph laughed, for by this time he knew the voice of the king, yea, and the face of him under his sally. So he cried back in his answer, and in such wise as if the words came rather from his luck than from his youth, O, Sir King, beware, beware, lest thou tremble when thou seest the bare blade of the Friend of the Well, more than thou tremblest erst when the blade was hidden in the sheath before the throne of thine hall. But the king cried out in a loud, harsh voice, "Thou, young man, beware thou, and try not thy luck overmuch. We are as many as these trees, and thou canst not prevail over us. Go thy ways free, and leave me what thou canst not help leaving." "Ye fool," cried Ralph, "and what wilt thou do with these two?" Said the king, "The traitor I will flay, and the woman I will bed." Scarce were the words out of his mouth, ere Ralph gave forth a great cry and drew his sword, set spurs to his horse, and galloped up on the road with all his band at his back, for they had drawn anigh amidst this talk. But or ever they came on the foemen, they heard a great confused cry of onset mingled with affright. And lo, the king threw up his arms and fell forward on his horse's neck with a great arrow through his throat. Ralph drave on, sword in hand, crying out, "Home, home to Upmeads!" And anon was amidst of the foe smiting on either hand, his men following, shouting, "Ho, for the friend of the well!" And amongst the foemen, who were indeed very many, was huge dismay, so that they made a sorry defence before the band of the wayfarers, who knew not what to make of it, till they noted that arrows and casting spears were coming out of the woods on either side, which smote none of them, but many of the foemen. Short was the tale, for in few minutes there were no men of the foe together, save those that were fleeing down the road to Cheaping Knowe. Ralph would not suffer his men to follow the chase, for he wotted not with whom he might have to deal besides the king's men. He drew his men together, and looked round for Ursula, and saw that the sage had brought her up anigh him, and there she sat a horseback, pale and panting with the fear of death and joy of deliverance. Now Ralph cried out from his saddle in a loud voice, and said, "Ho, ye of the arrows of the wood! Ye have saved me from my foemen. Where be ye, and what be ye?" Came a loud voice from out of the wood in the right hand, "Children, tell of the warrior whose sons ye be." Straightway brake out a huge bellowing on either side of the road, as though the wood were a full of great neat. Then cried out Ralph, "If ye be of the kindred of the bull, ye will belike be my friends rather than my foes. Or have ye heard tell of Ralph of Upmeads? Now let your captain come forth and speak with me." Scarce were the words out of his mouth, ere a man came leaping forth out of the wood and stood before Ralph in the twilight of the boughs. And Ralph noted of him that he was clad pretty, much like to Bull Shockhead of the past time, save for that he had great bull's head for a helm, which afterwards Ralph found out was of iron and leather, and a great gold ring on his arm. Then Ralph thrust his sword back into the sheath, and his folk handled their weapons peaceably, while Ralph hailed the newcomer as Lord or Duke of the Bulls. "Belike," quoth the said chieftain, "thou wouldest wish to show me some token, whereby we may wot that thou art a friend of the well, and of our kinsman concerning whom he sent us a message." Then Ralph bethought him of the pouch with the knot of grass therein which Bull Shockhead had given him at Goldburg. So he drew it out and gave it into the hand of the chieftain, who no sooner caught a glimpse thereof than said, "Verily, our brother's hand hath met thine when he gave you this. Yet forsooth, now that I look on thee, I may say that scarce did I need token to tell me that thou art a very man. For I can see thee that thou art of great honour and worship, and thou didst ride boldly against the foemen, when thou knewest not that we had waylaid the waylayers. Now I wot that there is no need to ask thee whether thou wouldest get thee out of our mountains by the shortest road, yet wilt thou make it a little longer and somewhat safer if ye will suffer us to lead thee by the way of our dwelling." So Ralph yeasaid his bidding without more words. As they spake thus together, the road both above and below was become black with weaponed men, and some of Ralph's band looked on one another as though they doubted their new friends somewhat. But the sage of Swevenham spoke to them and bade them fear not. "For," said he, "so far as we go, who are now their friends, there is no guile in these men." The bull captain heard him and said, "Thou sayest sooth, old man, and I shall tell thee that scarce had a band like them come safe through the mountains, save by great good luck, without the leave of us. For the fool with the crown that lieth there dead had of late days so stirred up the folks of the fells through his grimness and cruelty, that we had been minded to stop everything bigger than a cur-dog that might seek to pass by us, for at least so long as yonder rascal should live. But ye be welcome. So now let us to the road, for the day weareth." So the tribesmen gat them into order, and their duke went on to the left side of Ralph, while Ursula rode on his right hand. The duke and all his men were afoot, but they went easily and swiftly as wolves trot. As for the slain of the waylayers, of whom there were some 60, the bull captain would not but let them lie on the road. For, said he, there be wolves and lynxes enough in the wood, and the ravens of the uplands and the kites shall soon scent of the carrion. They shall have burial soon enough. Neither will we meddle with it, nay, not so much as to hang the felon king's head at the saddle-bow lord. By sunset they were out of the wood and on the side of a rough fell. So they went no further, but lighted fires at the edge of the thicket, and made merry round about them, singing their songs concerning the deeds of their folk, and jesting withal, but not foully. And they roasted venison of hart and hind at the fires, and they had with them wine, the more part whereof they had found in the slain king's carriages, and they made great feast to the wayfarers, and were exceeding fain of them after their fashion. Whereas if a man were their friend, he could scarce be enough their friend, and if he were their foe, they could never be fierce enough with him. Chapter 11. They come through the mountains into the plain. On the morrow early they all fared on together, and thereafter they went on for 2 days more till they came into a valley amidst of the mountains, which was fair and lovely. And therein was the dwelling or town of this folk of the fells. It was indeed no stronghold, save that it was not easy to find, and that the way thither was well defensible were foemen to try it. The houses thereof were artless, the chiefest of them like to a great barn of an abbey in our land, the others low and small. But the people, both men and women, haunted mostly the big house. As for the folk, they were for the more part like those whom they had met before, strong men, but not high of stature, black-haired with blue or grey eyes, cheerful of countenance, and of many words. Their women were mostly somewhat more than comely, smiling and kind of speech, but not suffering the caresses of aliens. They saw no thralls amongst them, and when Ralph asked hereof, how might it be that they were men-catchers, they told them that when they took men and women, as oft they did, they always sold them for what they would, and bring to the plain dwellers, or else slew them, or held them to ransom, but never brought them home to their stead. Howbeit, when they took children, as whiles befell, they sometimes brought them home, and made them very children of their folk, with many uncouth prayers and worship of their gods, who were indeed, as they deemed, but forefathers of the folk. Now Ralph, he and his being known for friends, these wild men could not make enough of them, and as it were compelled them to abide there 3 days, feasting them and making them all cheer they might. And they showed the wayfarers their manner of hunting, both of the hart and the boar, and of wild bulls also. At first Ralph somewhat loathed all this, though he kept a pleasant countenance towards his host, for sorely he desired the fields of Upmeads, and his father's house. But at last, when the hunt was up in the mountains, and especially of the wild bulls, the heart and the might in him so arose that he enforced himself to do well. And the wild men wondered at his prowess, whereas he was untried in this manner of sports, and they deemed him one of the gods, and said that their kinsmen had done well to get him so good a friend. Both Ursula and the sage withheld them from this hunting, and Ursula abode with the women, who told her much of their ways of life and stories of old time. Frank and free they were, and loved her much, and she was fain of such manly-minded women, after the sleight and lives of the poor thralls of Utterbol. On the 4th day the wayfarers made them ready, and departed. And the chief of the folk went with them with a chosen band of weaponed men, partly for the love of his guests, and partly that he might see the Goldburg men-at-arms safe back to the road unto the plain and the mid-house of the mountains. For they went now by other ways, which missed the said house. On this journey naught befell to tell of, and they all came down safe into the plain. There the Goldburg men took their wage, and bidding farewell, turned back with the wild men, praising Ralph much for his frankness and open hand. As for the wild men, they exceeded in their sorrow for the parting, and many of them wept and howled as though they had seen him die before their faces. But all that came to an end, and presently their cheer was amended, and their merry speech and laughter came down from the pass unto the wayfarers' ears, as each band rode its way. This is the end of chapters 6 through 11 of Book 4 of The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. In the next video, we will proceed to Chapter 12, entitled The Roads Sunder Again. Thank you for listening.